Home, the gold.
He could be too far. No, he's kicking. Oh, what a catch!
Puts a spicy forehand out in front of Naomi Morcilla.
Move for the win. Team Canada. Garrett Wu!
Santos with the layout grab.
Oh, that fantastic grab. The claws of Chaffer.
Canada just became the world champions.
Yo, Canada and the rest of the world. You're listening to the Huckin podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Theo and Danie, living in Kingston, Ontario.
And I'm Danny Furby from Vancouver, BC, and together we are your coast-to-coast guide to all things Canadian Ultimate. Speaking of Canadian Ultimate, what have you been up to, Theo?
Well, first of all, Happy New Year to you before I even say what I've been up to, because
Yes.
Danny was not on the last episode, back in action. Let's go. Starting the new year off right. What I've been up to, I've been watching, I've talked about this before, a lot of college football, getting back into the swing of things at work. So all our students are back as of Monday, but I've been here the week before getting things ready. So back at work, try not to think too much about New Year's resolutions, because a lot of people have that. Just trying to live my life, you know. That's what I've been doing this January. A little bit of disappointing news, which we'll get to in the news, that affects Frisbee for myself. So mourning that a little bit. What about you?
Yeah, I was visiting family this last week. I promised my niece and nephew last Christmas that with their gift came an adventure with their auntie. So we would go and do something that they would like spend the day together, not both of them together, them individually. And things just got busy last year. And so it came to Christmas this year and they reminded me that I had made that promise.
Ooh,
and so I went
tough.
back onto the island and I went to Avatar with my nephew and we got him whatever he wanted. He ate way too much candy and it was awesome. And then the next day I went with my niece and we got our nails done. She got her nails done as sprinkles and we got gelato and it was really cute and it was really fun. So I feel really good about that. I also got to see my friend who just had a baby on the island and my other friend who just bought a house on the island. My friends are all moving there. So my family's there. I think I'm next. In terms of Ultimate, most of what I've been doing has just been a lot of training. Had my first league game of the season last night. I'm on a team called Mid at Best. And literally it's like Kevin Underhill, Chewy, Jessica Rockcliffe, Julia Zhang.
Doesn't seem fair.
It's team Ari Niddickman. I gotta say the hubby too. The team is stacked, so Mid at Best is really funny. Our cheer, one person has to propose something that they think is mid at best. And then everybody on the count of three votes whether they agree or disagree with that take. So very exciting.
Can you give an example
stuff.
of a take? Can you
Mine,
give an example
mine was really
of one
bad.
of the
Mine was
takes?
really bad. I didn't realize that there was 3-ply toilet paper when I said this, but I said 1-ply toilet paper, and they all disagreed with me. They said that is not mid at best. That is low, and I didn't know. I thought that was in the middle. Somebody else said a 4-liter jug of President's Choice chocolate ice cream.
Very specific.
Yeah, I think it helps to be specific. So those are kind of the things that were said. So very exciting. We won both our games.
Yeah, I don't know who you're playing, but I'm scared for them.
We actually played TT and Forever Young.
Oh, okay. Oh, fun.
Yeah, so you do know who we were playing.
Oh, okay. Well, good luck to those teams as they take on this Mid at Best. We're gonna jump in to the news, do some short news, and then we got a great interview coming up for you. So the Executive Director, Ultimate Canada, Danny Saunders, we're going to get to that after the news. Jump in there right now.
We now have breaking news.
Welcome to the news section where we bring you all the news about Ultimate that has been happening. So this isn't necessarily news, but it's related to the national teams. That's kind of newsy.
It's news. It's news.
So normally the national teams do 2 training camps, but given the fact that the teams are made in late November, December, and the first training camps that are going to be happening, we're going to be in May, and the tournament is at the very beginning of July. All 3 teams decided to add a 3rd training camp, which I don't know how often that's been done. When it started with the open team, they were going to be going to Vegas. And then I was like, maybe we want to go to Vegas. And we did all the research And the women's team was like, what about Orlando? And then I was like, ooh, what about Orlando? And I did a bunch of different scenarios, looking at different budgets, accommodations, and everything. And so now the open team is going to Vegas, and the women's and the mixed team are going to Orlando in February to do our first rounds of training camps then. So very excited. It's going to be a bit of a grind to get there from Vancouver. It's really hard flying wise, but it's really nice from the eastern provinces. So I'm excited to kind of get everyone together in one big house, play lots of games, get lots of practices in, bonding. It's going to be good.
That sounds like a fun time.
I'm stoked.
Florida any time of year, but when it's cold out winter in certain places in Canada, that's a good reprieve there from the snow. And the snow did rear its head in my neck of the woods in Kingston, Ontario. That's the second part of our news. Literally the day this podcast released, the news came out contradicting what we said in the news, which is that the university tournament happening in this city, as well as O4 UC, were I guess canceled. Well, the university one's canceled. I guess they're trying to move it. I know O4 UC, there's a lot of time before C4 UC, so they're going to try to move it and find a different venue for that. I don't think they found one yet, according to my sources so far. So basically the dome, it's not looking good. I think it collapsed from snow. There's a big snowstorm out here over Christmas. And the dome is no longer able to host, which sucks because I was expected to be playing League. So good for you that you can play League. Unfortunately, in Kingston, you cannot because of this dome. So that sucks. So hopefully the university athletes can play these other tournaments. I know there's, I think, at least one more in the schedule. So make sure you register, get out for that. And then the last thing, we talked about it last week, but we're going to highlight it again. If you like communications, maybe if you're bilingual as well, you should apply for the position at Ultimate Canada, be their communications manager. And then I guess you would talk with us a bunch as well. So that'd be kind of cool.
Join us.
Yeah, I know. We had some people reach out as well for other things, which was great. So thank you for doing that, Huckin audience. But yeah, you should apply. It'd be cool to get someone with experience as well as like ultimate knowledge out there. So we just want to promote that position again before we head to the actual main event, which is us talking with Danny Saunders. A lot of people sent in questions. Thank you for doing that. And first of all, following us on Instagram, and then second of all, submitting questions. So right after the break, we're going to be talking with him. Lots of good answers. Probably some stuff that you don't expect. I predict that's going to be coming for you because you think his role is one way, but there's a lot of other stuff. So we're going to head right there and be right back.
Hey, it's Danny here.
Theo too.
New year, new you.
We want to wish everyone a happy new year from the Huckin podcast. Truly appreciate all the support, and we're excited for 2023.
We're still your coast-to-coast guide to all things Canadian Ultimate. Welcome to the main event, everybody. I am so honored to introduce Danny Saunders, thou who needs no introduction. But I will say a little quick thing about, I call him Manny because when we played together back in the day in Victoria Mixed Ultimate, we couldn't have two Dannys on the team. And so I was Fanny and he was Manny. So if you don't know who Danny Saunders is and you haven't played against him, he's probably the one on the field layout blocking you in a full costume and also winning the party. So a very professional man in the same sense. So you've been my role model for work hard, play hard. And I feel very excited to be able to chat with you today about all things Canadian Ultimate. So my first question for you, Mr. Manny, is how did you get into your role? And maybe first you could talk a little bit about how did you get into Ultimate in general?
Great. Well, thank you, Danny and Theo, for having me on the show. It's great to be here. Maybe I'll start with the ultimate piece because this is, I guess, how do you get hooked on the sport? And for me, this is way back in the day in 1992. I missed the school bus and I had to wait an hour for my mom to come pick me up. And there was an ultimate practice run by Coach Dean Wright out of Winnipeg, who's now in the Ultimate Canada Hall of Fame. He's actually been there for quite some time. And he said, "Why don't you come and play?" So I did. I love the sport immediately. I think a lot of Ultimate players have that initial reaction the first time you run after a disc and you score a point. I had such a great time. I missed the bus on purpose the next week, which results in a little conversation with my mom about if I just want to go, I just have to let her know and that she'll pick me up later. Ever since then, I was hooked, and I played in my first junior nationals, the first one, in 1994 when CUC was in Winnipeg that year. Played on some junior national teams, a number of club teams, going to Club Worlds and different events. And from there, I went to school out at Western, played for the team there for a few years, and came back to Winnipeg after I graduated from Western and got a job with the local league and provincial organization. So the Manitoba Organization of Disc Sports, or MODS, because that's a mouthful, hired their first executive director in 2004. And that was me. A few years before that, I did outreach for them as a summer job where I'd go and teach summer camps for Ultimate and go into high schools running gym classes.
Wow.
But that's kind of my background into getting into Ultimate for work. And as my time while I was there with MODS, a lot of great things happened. I was able to double the size of the league in 4 years, start junior leagues and high school championships. We built the Winnipeg Ultimate Park, so we got land from the city to build our own Ultimate facility. And in 2005, I ran CUC as the general manager. And it was an awesome experience, had a wonderful team of people that I worked with that year. A few of them, like Jess Benoit, have come back out of retirement to help out at Ultimate Canada events again, which is great to see. But I joined the CUPA board at that time. It was before Ultimate Canada changed its name. We changed it so it was bilingual. But CUPA, or the Canadian Ultimate Players Association, on that board, I was there for, I guess, a couple of years, up until 2007. So 2007, right before CUC, our executive director resigned, and we needed someone to help out with kind of working between the board and the local organizers in Toronto. And I decided to resign from the CUPA board and apply for it. I figured I could do this job because it was only 10 hours a week and go to law school at the same time. And somehow I'm still in the role here now today.
I didn't know any of that, and I feel really bad about that now. I didn't know Dean Wright was the one that got you into Ultimate. That's so cool. He's a legend.
Dean Wright is he is a legend and still working, running Hold Back the Snow out in Winnipeg and getting lots of kids at St. John's Ravenscourt playing every year. He was really one of those figures in the community who started a local junior tournament, started momentum, and gave something to an opportunity that other schools and players could come play in.
For those watching on the YouTube version, when he mentioned the Dean Wright comment, I think you could see the shock on both of our faces because we know that name. He's a legend. And we talked, and we both had the same reaction there. So before I ask this next question, I want to know, did you end up completing that law degree, or is that still in waiting here?
So I do have a law degree. I finished, so partway through my law degree, I switched to it being half-time and working for Ultimate Canada full-time. And then I finished my law degree, and then I ended up getting an MBA after that as well.
So a person with many degrees here helping run Ultimate Canada.
They're
so
all
we do
behind
like that.
me right here.
There you go. There you go. And speaking of Ultimate Canada, you have the role as executive director. Many people might think that involves a lot of different things and into other roles. So this is your chance to maybe talk about what your role is specifically. People can get to know you more and kind of know who to ask for certain questions, because we're going to get to some questions later. But first off, what's the scope of your role there?
Fair question. So the scope of my role keeps changing, and that's probably the one constant that I've had. Like I alluded to earlier, when I started, it was a quarter-time position. So I just helped with kind of general administration. I was able to early on get the provinces, so we call them PTSOs, on board, and the different leagues to pay a fee up to Ultimate Canada, which allowed us to have some money to expand staffing and to expand programs and work on things like coaching programs. So we were able to keep growing the organization and growing the sport up till pre-pandemic when we had 5 full-time staff. And at that point, I was primarily human resource management, working with our provinces, sponsorship, and finance would be the areas that I primarily worked on. But over those years, I kind of worked on every area until we had enough support to be able to bring staffing in. During the pandemic, we unfortunately had to let a lot of our employees go, a lot of great people that we're sad to no longer have with the organization. They make huge contributions, and I know for especially Terry Lynn Belanger, who is a longtime staff member, ran a number of our events for many years. And she graciously helped us our first year back from the pandemic in 2021 in running our events for UCI in Ottawa. But with that kind of a situation with the pandemic and losing a lot of our staffing, it was really challenging for us to ramp up and figure out what my role was. Because basically from late 2020 till close to UCI, I did pretty much everything. A lot of things were in hibernation. We were just waiting to get programs going. But then UCI started. We hired some summer students through the summer jobs grant through the federal government. And had some people help us out, like Terry Lynn, and we're able to run some of these events that first year there, which was nice because we had a bit of a doomsday clock going on for how many months we had left for money before we ran out. So since that time, we've slowly been able to add staff back in. 2022 has been a bit of a challenge. In that we've just been a little behind the ball the whole year with lower staffing. So it started with just myself, but then we were able to hire Troy Weston as our events manager and bring Leanne Leduc back in as our summer student who became full-time in the fall. She's our events coordinator during the summer. And it's been one of those things where we used to have 5 and then we only have partial staff and not the 6 months of planning beforehand to kind of support everything. 2022 also had more national team programs in the same year as we've ever had before, and still the uncertainty of, are we going to have to cancel events and take a financial hit? So we didn't run high schools last year. We didn't run C4 UC last year, and we had to cancel a few of our university events that we had planned to run in the indoor series. So for us, it was a little challenging to be able to ramp up staffing quick enough for where we were going to be while acknowledging that risk level. To make things even more challenging, the labor market is a little trickier. We did just put out a post asking for a communications manager position. We're hoping to find someone for that position to be able to start fairly soon, so we can return to closer staffing levels, closer to 2020, early 2020 at least, staffing levels there. So the new positions we'll end up having, we're going to do a bit of restructuring, but Troy Weston will be working basically with our seniors and masters programs. So whether that's events or it's national teams. And then we will have Leanne Leduc will be doing working with juniors and university, both events and national teams. And then we'll bring in our communications manager to support some of our regional events and general communications. So hopefully that lets me move back closer to the role I had before, kind of supporting staff through the various areas, supporting planning, working on the next strategic plan for Ultimate Canada, and working to move the sport forward.
Okay, a couple of things. Elevate also uses Canada Summer Jobs, so if you are looking for summer employment, that's a good grant, and you should reach out to me if you are curious, because we've done it for 3 years in a row now, and it's been awesome. We've been able to hire a lot more young people because we've had a little bit of financial support. I think obviously you had to pivot so much. I think everybody that's in business or kind of in leadership positions in companies that have to downsize and then scale back up again, it kind of puts a lot of pressure on different points. And I think Ultimate Canada, from my perspective, has done a really good job of bouncing back. I know we don't see all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes, but it's just a testament to people like TL who were able to kind of step up when we needed it, because UCI was just such a joyous event for all of us that got to attend it and be there, because we freaking missed Ultimate. So shout out to all the humans that make things possible and make us have all these experiences that are super fun. So, okay. We're going to kind of deviate a little bit from the kind of like role and intro about you, and kind of find out a little bit about your vision or kind of how you see things going in the future. So specifically talking about Ultimate in Canada and then Ultimate Canada as an entity, where do you see things growing to within the next 5 years?
Yeah, with the pandemic, it's really tough to kind of gauge where the trajectory is. I'm hoping things are stable going forward, but for us, the first and most important thing is I'd like to see Ultimate Canada at least stabilize from the pandemic in the next year or so, and be able to make gains across the board in the next few years. One of the interesting areas that did increase was University Ultimate. So it had greater participation post-pandemic than pre-pandemic. And I think that trend will continue as the sport has a lot of appeal. And it's really fun. I remember my University Ultimate days. It was great going to tournaments with friends and kind of having those relationships there. I think in the next 5 years, something a lot of people may not know is Ultimate Canada is not funded by Sport Canada. And I would like to see that change in the next 5 years. We worked on it for a number of years, and we even met their eligibility requirements. But they changed the rules on us twice and decided that they weren't going to allow new sports in. So we've been waiting. They're supposed to have a new intake over and over again. And then the pandemic hit, and they're like, oh, we're going to delay it another year. So they did recently have a new intake, and I'm hoping that new intake, that we'll be able to get our foot in the door. So Sport Canada opens a lot of opportunities up for sports. Part of it is just straight funding, so you get money that you're able to do things with. The other is that it gives you access to a number of sport grants that you can apply to host international events. So if we wanted to host a Canada Cup or Ultimate Canada Invitational and bring and help fund international teams to attend, that's something we could potentially seed with that kind of grant money. But then there's other federal government grants that require Sport Canada funding. So 5 years, we are working on our new strategic plan, and it's probably not going to be quite 5 years in length, but it'll hopefully have some more ideas for us to look at. But I do think that our national team program, we're going to have better infrastructure in place. I know there's been talk about really focusing on that development pathway, having more coaches. We've had more applications in the U20 program. There's a lot more assistant applications than ever before, which is awesome to see. And I think that interest and that growth is going to continue. And I think, we'll have more opportunities at a younger age, looking at development for U17 age groups. I think we'll look at development and opportunities for people who are no longer in our podium pathway, as we call it. So once you graduate to masters, or like myself into grandmasters, I think there's going to be lots more interest kind of continuing in that direction. And the last area I'm hoping for is to see in 5 years is more opportunities to participate. And that's not just kind of competitions, but I'd like to see it kind of grow locally with different age groups, more First Nations communities, more rural communities, having the opportunity to play the sport. And maybe my baby, if I could have it one day, is to have Canadian Beach Nationals in Cancun so that we could play in January or February. I don't know if that would really happen, but
not in Canada, but we like it.
Yeah, I don't know if that would really happen, but I'd love to see opportunities like beach be available.
You could call it like Cancunida Nationals.
There we go.
Boom! A new name has been made.
I would go. I'm just saying. Thank you for kind of all that vision and everything. I didn't know that about the university series, so that was a good little nugget. Theo, I don't know if we shared the same thought in that moment. Did you? Were you thinking something in that moment?
I already know what you're about to say, but I'll let you. I'll give you the honors of saying it.
How about you say it?
No, you say it.
Okay. We've been given a lot of feedback that the work that we do, the Huckin podcast, has really kind of helped shape a lot of College Ultimate for the last 2 years and just made people really excited about it and more engaged. And there's a lot of kids in even BC that didn't know that schools in the East had teams or had good teams, and they were more excited to go to those schools. So am I on the right path here, Theo? Yeah. So I feel like I don't know what percentage we could say has to do with the fact that there's more attention being paid to the university division, but even having all of our awards we posted on Ultiworld and stuff was pretty cool. So that made me really excited. I'm excited to grow along with the university series, and hopefully we can get the adults back to a place where they're also growing as well.
Yeah, there. Spoiler alert for the Huckin audience. There may be a question about university nationals coming up, so you got to keep listening because there might be one coming. Is all I'm saying. So now we're going to talk more younger. We're going to talk about the youths out there. How is Ultimate Canada going to grow the sport amongst the youth specifically? So we talked about some of the coaching, developing coaches, but are there any other plans there to grow the sport amongst the youths?
Yeah, so as a national organization, most of the youth that we work with end up at the national team level or a prospect kind of going to nationals. So we can't impact Youth Ultimate without working in partnership with others. We need to work with provinces, we need to work with clubs, we need to work with leagues, we need to work with organizations that are working with that age group. And really our role is providing resources and being a hub to share opportunities and ways to grow Youth Ultimate. There's a number of organizations that are doing great work. So I mean, out in BC, Danny can speak about Elevate and experience there in growing Ultimate, but there's also Ultimate Spirit that's doing a fabulous job with First Nations communities and getting youth more involved across the province, not just in the major urban centers. And sharing, they got to present at the Ultimate Canada conference this year and share their model, share some of their resources, and speak about what they've done. And it's great to have members of the community, champions in the community like Jimmy Roney, who do that kind of work and can share it with the community. I think some other examples that we can share and look at is the long-term athlete development model and how to optimize athletes in their development pathways to make the sport fun and engaging, and to help keep them involved and wanting to keep playing. So the long-term athlete development model is one that we created and will be updating for Ultimate specific. There's a lot of guidelines across sports. But the FQU in Quebec has had a bunch of success doing smaller-sided Ultimate. So 4-on-4, 5-on-5 with younger age groups. And it's great to see that momentum and how it's more accessible. And you can get more people playing. They get more touches with the disc and seeing how that's working. So I think for us, a lot of our role is going to be listening to organizations across the country, sharing success stories and trying to help share the resources from those success stories on how different communities can grow their youth programs. And we do have a few grants that can help kickstart programs or help programs get to that next level. So we have coaching grants, we have outreach grants, and the Art Hawkins Fund as well. Applications for those should all be available later this winter.
I think this it's kind of like a prime example of there's going to be a lot of questions rather that you're going to be getting that we sourced from the Huckin A audience, and a lot of them kind of talk about things that are maybe not in the scope of your role. People didn't know necessarily what was kind of all under your umbrella, but growing youth, the grassroots thing, is not what a national governing body's role is. And so I think having you come on and kind of clarify all of these things is really helpful. So the following questions were all user generated. These are from the Huckin A fans. Some of these fans are diehard. This first one especially comes from one of our favorite fans. So they wanted to know your perspective on the evolution of Canadian Ultimate in the last 25 years.
All right. Well, I started playing about 30 years ago, so I guess I can cover that range. I think my biggest impression is there has been a significant culture change in the sport and in how the game is played. So athletes are a lot more focused on training outside of play, a little less focused on the party. And in some regions, some of those fun tournaments aren't as successful as they used to be. So I can think of the Prairies. There used to be quite a good kind of fun tournament scene that people would go to and meet up. And, culture is always going to change. And I think that's going to continue in the future. And everyone's going to feel a certain part of their life playing Ultimate is going to be the golden age for them. But that's one thing that I've really noticed is that change. And I think the game has changed quite a bit. I mean, the rules have changed. You can see recently a higher emphasis on dangerous play has been there. There's less kind of I think when I started, you turned around and got the disc on a competitive team and you would probably going to get fouled right away. That's not as prevalent now as it was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the game has changed quite a bit in that way, and kind of the people that are playing, there's a lot more training involved. But I don't know if there's as much focus on disc skills as some of the early players had. A lot of the early players were multi-disc athletes. I think you're seeing some of that after the pandemic again with a number of people interested in disc golf. But some of the best throwers I saw growing up, they played a number of disc sports, and they also could compete in a number of different things. But their throwing often set them apart, and you would kind of see that for that age group. As the sport's grown, because it was really young at the time, I'd say in the mid-90s, juniors just started. But juniors and the idea of actually having a coach on your team are a couple of changes that it's funny to think about now, but a lot of teams still don't have coaches, which is, is fine, but it's evolving. You can see now the elite teams all want to have a coach. They didn't used to. You can see now in terms of the juniors, how many teams are playing. We had to switch from mixed, and then we went into having open and women's juniors, providing more opportunities. And there's just been a huge kind of boom there in terms of that growth at the junior level and also at the league level. Leagues across the country grew quite a bit, especially in the early 2000s. And at one point in that time, Canada had more paid Ultimate employees than the US did. The difference was the US ones all worked for USA Ultimate, and the ones in Canada all worked for the leagues. So you had these very large leagues with thousands and thousands of players. And it was a really interesting a time kind of seeing that growth, but also understanding still that's where a lot of our strength as a country is we have a lot of leagues with a lot of resources, a lot of players who are trying different things to improve the sport, trying different programs. As we've got older as a sport, a little more mature, we've also had masters growing and grandmasters growing and have integrated into the sports system. So people may not know this, but Ultimate's been in the Acadian Games. It's been in the Jeux de la Francophonie Canadienne. We've developed a national coaching certification program and are really kind of moving closer and closer to a more mature sport in terms of what we're connected to. We have provincial and territorial sport organizations that are funded by their provincial governments that are then able to run programs and under that umbrella. And I think the last area, and you alluded to it a little there, Danny, around University Ultimate is around media. So it's really changed a lot from, adding social media changes things, but back in the day, Chasing Plastic had a magazine, Eric Rader out of Winnipeg, he would run a magazine. And that was kind of the news that you could get, but it wasn't following necessarily everything. The UPA also had a magazine that they used to be sending out in those days. And then you had other groups such as Ulti Village, Rob Barrel, kind of some of the first videography of Ultimate. And it was great. He'd go to all these tournaments and get coverage to be able to see kind of how the sport was growing and how the elite players are playing. But now, it's gone to live stream and there's so much more media out there. So those are some of, I guess, my perspectives on the last 25 years.
Lots to be shared there. And, I haven't been been playing that long compared to the 30 years. So you've seen a lot of growth, and you get some good throwbacks there talking about Alti Village. Recommend anyone to check out some of those, I guess, DVDs if they're still, I don't think they're probably available for sale, but you can see them on YouTube and stuff. So we do have a passionate fan who's a big videographer out there. So they're, you can think who that is, but they want to know, is CUC's, the university one specifically, going to always be in Brampton? Because that's near their house. So is that something that's going to keep happening? And maybe speak to why, because Brampton, for those who don't know, doesn't really have a club team that plays out of there. So people might also want to know, why is it always in Brampton, even for CUC? I know the reason why, but Danny, I'll let you say it.
Sure. So to answer the question, not necessarily, but probably for the foreseeable future. And the reason we're in Brampton is in three major factors. The first is the fields. So they have a lot of grass fields in one location, and those are grass fields that also have turf fields on site for if there's inclement weather. In 2005, we had to cancel University Nationals when I was in Montreal. I don't remember the year off the top of my head, but we had a year in Waterloo as well where we trashed the fields and got into a lot of trouble with the city. Thank you, Andrew Portwine, for letting us do it.
Rim Park.
Rim Park, yeah. But we wanted to avoid that with some of the Div 1 model, but also with having locations that have a backup plan in place. And one of the best backup plans in place is having a lot of fields so you can rotate them if they're getting soggy, so that you can shorten games there and move teams around and reduce the wear as well. And then turf is a great option there at the end. The second issue, or the second reason for Brampton, is money. The city gives us a grant every year. It's usually in the 5 digits plus kind of, or 5 digits range. I wish it was plus. But that makes a significant difference in what we can do when you get a grant, because it does allow you then to be able to bring in some outside help to run the event, to be able to help bring in additional observers, to be able to help with the live stream, things of that nature. And the last one is that it's close to Pearson Airport. Pearson Airport is, teams flying from across the country. It's the most accessible airport, has flights from across the country going there. And if you have teams, you're wanting teams to fly from both BC and Atlantic Canada, you need to have it to be easily accessible for them, because they're already paying more than all the Ontario and Quebec teams to attend, just with the flights there. So those three factors make it very attractive for Ultimate Canada to host. Now, our biggest challenge is that there isn't really another venue that we've identified that is going to be as close to as good for us to be able to host the event. We have hosted in Montreal, but we've had to split venues, which makes it more challenging in terms of splitting resources. And the fields at one of the venues was not as good. So that made it also a little tricky, and that's been a while. We've held it in Ottawa in the past, but it's also a lot smaller, the venue that we've hosted at. So if anyone has a lead on a great venue that has turf fields and maybe 20 grass fields to go with that, close to a accessible airport, that would be a good fit for us. We definitely consider it going forward.
I know a lot of people say a lot of things about Brampton, and people love it or they hate it. But when you go to an Ultimate tournament, how often are you actually exploring the city? Or are you just flying in, playing the tournament, and then leaving? I know what your answer is. Okay, so first of all, so those of you that are watching the YouTube, I know Theo and I let you in on some kind of behind the scenes stuff sometimes. We have a code, and I'm gonna out us right now. If we want
we've been outed. Let's go.
If you want to interrupt somebody else without actually interrupting them, we touch our face, like our beard. So if you see it online, you'll see that we do this. And I think Theo did this by accident. And so I thought he had something to say in my last question. And so I gave him space. So we ended up skipping a question. Anyways, long story short, Saunders, we got to go back. We got to go back to the future. So You know, you answered that question about 25 years, how the evolution.
Yeah.
We're going to go back to the future. So we want to know where you see Ultimate going in 25 years, or the potential of the sport.
Sure. So I think for the competitive athletes and the elite athletes, it's going to continue becoming more and more formalized. And I think we'll be able to integrate, or I'll see the sport integrate more from what other sports are doing well, and try and find those pieces in terms of helping our athletes and helping them develop, and having, I guess, more supports for the high performance athletes out there. I do think that trajectory around coach development we talked about, I think that's going to continue. I think we're going to be seeing more and more coaches involved in the sport. I do think we're going to see more growth outside of our major cities. So hopefully more rural communities and First Nations communities. And I think we're going to run into some new culture challenges around how the sport shifts. We've already seen some of those, and trying to figure out how we want to stay true to some core values and how we're going to evolve as a sport. But there's going to be more players, and not in terms of athletes, but more organizations or groups that aren't necessarily ultimate first involved with the sport. You can already see that with school divisions in a number of areas. And how do we work with those organizations that aren't run by ultimate players? How do we make sure spirit of the game is still important, or is still involved in those leagues, and that the coaches that they have involved have some training around the sport? I think it's going to continue to grow as the sport integrates more and more with the sports system, the Canadian sports system, in trying to figure out how do we work with all these different groups while keeping, the identity that we want to have. I also see some changes around kind of tournament structures in the longer term, and formatting that will keep changing as we grow. But I don't know if we'll play as many games as we currently do. I remember back in the day, some USAU schedules, their UPA back in the day might have had 10 games in a weekend kind of thing, or 9 games. And those, if you look at what's healthy for an athlete, we probably all recognize that that's too many games. But you look at other sports and how many games they have in a tournament, we're still above a lot of those. So is that going to continue to shift? If you look at a world's model, it's fewer games so that people can be at their top condition. I was laughing kind of watching some of the World Cup for FIFA, and they were like, oh, this team is only getting 2 days of rest before their next game. And the athletes complaining. I was like, oh, that sounds like a lot for an ultimate player. But I think we might look at shifting some of that and how that works. I also think our demographic is getting older, so more grandmasters, great grandmasters, things of that nature.
All right. Speaking of changes, we're already on this note. This next one, I don't know how much you can speak to, but it was recently announced that Ultimate Canada and Team Canada is switching apparel providers from VC to B. And I know that VC was the Team Canada provider for as long as I can remember. And now the switch to B. Just curious if you can speak to that.
Yeah, definitely I can. So Ultimate Canada actually releases an RFP to apparel companies that
what is that? Just for
interest.
Those that don't know what that is.
A request for proposals.
Nice.
Out to companies every few years. So it's usually on a 2 or 3 year window. And trying to create like an opportunity for anyone who wants to be involved in the sport to put their best foot forward and how they want to partner with Ultimate Canada over those years. In the past, we've worked with other companies such as Gaia. I'm dating myself now, going back that far.
That's a throwback name right there.
Yeah, but also, Daredevil Discs was our national team sponsor at one point as well. So we have had a few different companies over the years. In terms of this time around, our board of directors reviewed applications, looked over in terms of who they thought had the strongest bid, and this time around ended up choosing B. I've had a great working relationship with VC. It has been a bit sad for me to, not be able to see some people that I've had great experiences with over the last, I don't know how many years. And, they've done a very good job in terms of fighting for equity and promoting values in sport, supporting the LGBTQ2S plus community. And I know they want to keep being involved in, Canadian Ultimate. But for B, I know they've been interested as well in the opportunity for a number of years, and they're a B certified carbon neutral company, and have been supporting some First Nations programming like Ultimate Spirit, and have done some very interesting athlete interviews that delved into different topics like mental health and looking at different areas of training. So, as a Canadian, I'm actually quite proud looking at how many good Canadian ultimate companies we've had over the years. Gaia was actually the first kind of ultimate specific company that I'm aware of. They had their own cleat in the late 90s. And, it's good to see a number of these companies staying active in the community and wanting to partner with Ultimate Canada.
Thank you for answering that, and you're throwing some throwback names that make me chuckle. Hopefully it does for you in the audience. Gaia, I know some people got the cleats. I haven't seen them out in league or at a tournament in a long time, but maybe someone got the Gaia cleats out and they're going to dust them out at some point. Yeah, that would be interesting. But I told you, Huckin audience, that there would be a question about UD Nats, and the time is now. So I don't know. We talked about the scope of the role, folks. So Danny might not be able to answer this. We're going to give it to him anyways. Will there be an expanded Division I at the university level? You did talk about, more participation. So some people want to know, is it going to go from 8 to 10 or 12? Or can you speak to that at all? Or yeah.
Yeah, so Andrew Batchelor, the university competition director, would be better positioned to answer, but I can provide some input. For the university series, we have looked at it at the competition committee level in the past, and it might be something that they look at their in-person meeting, which is likely later this month. I think it's scheduled to take place, where they look at a number of items in greater detail. But for this one in particular, we've looked at field challenges. And Division I, originally, the idea was we don't want to have to cancel this tournament. Now, being in October, the chance of a thunderstorm is fairly small. However, the chance of a lot of rain and maybe snow, maybe it being cold, is reasonably higher than you'd like to have. So a lot of the scheduling constraints are, if we have to go down to only having 2 turf fields, can we make sure Div 1 runs and that all the games go through? Once you start getting to 10 and 12 teams, it starts to become a little more challenging to get the number of games in, as well as trying to figure out, is it going to work schedule-wise? Are we starting to having to do 4 games in a day instead of 3? And if people played on the Friday qualifier, how many games is that going to be in total for them as well? The other side is, the last time we looked at it, there was unequal demand for it. So I think there's more open teams that were quite interested in it than women's teams. So trying to determine too, was that the best thing for competition there for both divisions, or was there an equity issue if we only expanded one? And how did we want to address that? So I don't know if it would be a short-term thing, but it is something that the competition committee does review annually, different ideas like this, and they may be looking at that again this year.
All right, jumping into another universe here. Any website update plans, Mr. Saunders?
So not in the short term. I know there was there's some challenges, I think, with any website platform. There's also a cost with any website platform and a big redevelopment. I think for us this year, our biggest focus is getting our staffing back to a level that we have enough support on the staffing side that we can actually undertake some bigger projects and have the resources to do them. And doing a website redesign is a fairly large and major project to look into. It is something that we'd want to make sure that we at least have the infrastructure in place to be able to support that before taking it on, because it could impact other areas where we want to get back to a higher service level.
I know that website redesign can be in like 6 figures.
Yeah.
It's not like it's $5,000 to fix your website. So just so everyone knows, sitting at home, it's expensive.
And perhaps the person asking this question may have saw the redesign for another organization and maybe thought that is where that question may have come from. So this one, I believe, is online, but I'm going to ask it anyways. The person wants to know, when are the tournament dates going to be released? Maybe this is also potentially related to like tryouts and other stuff, but they want to know about that.
Yeah, so we did, I think this is the first time we've done this in, I can remember how long, released a calendar of events for the year going forward. So we did that in December.
I loved that.
Yeah, and it's not full. So we had somewhere like, it's in this range, or sorry, we don't know the exact date yet, but the ones that we did know, we wanted to put it all in one place so people could plan. And same thing for national teams. So people had an idea of, maybe I want to try and coach or apply to coach these teams. And you put a few of them, then you can kind of sort out if you actually are going to apply for them all or not. In any case, most of them are their regional events. We do work with our provincial partners in determining dates for those. Those come out a little later often. And then university regionals, sometimes they flip a week. So I believe some of those are just finalizing with venues, but they generally are within kind of the last weekend of September, early October.
Okay, so I don't know if you can speak to this next question, but somebody proposed it and you didn't say no. So how can we better incorporate the Atlantic University region with the rest of Canada?
Yeah, so Canadian geography sucks. We're just way too big with too few people in between to have lots of opportunities close. I always feel for Newfoundland and Labrador in that they're a flight away or a really, really, really long ferry ride away to any competition. So they always have an added cost for them to get involved. If we're looking at the Maritimes, so excluding kind of Newfoundland and Labrador, those provinces, they are within driving distance. And there was greater interest. It was good to see PEI had a team this year for Atlantics and seeing some of the growth there. But it is, again, for them to meet up and play against teams in Ontario, Quebec as a flight. There's a similar issue with the West. So if you look at the BC teams, they can play amongst themselves, but sometimes going south, and that's across Canada, it's easier to find competition going that way. And the Prairies is similar. The Prairies actually is probably in one of the hardest spots in that it's, you got to drive 6-8 hours to get anywhere. So geography is tough, I think, across the country, and it's probably not just an Atlantic issue. It's probably an Atlantic and West issue in terms of how do we find those opportunities. So I think some of it is around trying to keep local opportunities. That's why we had the Atlantic event start. That's why we had the Prairie event start. That's why we had the Western University, was to at least create some sort of local opportunity and hope that maybe a team or two could go to university nationals. And one of the ways that this might be able to change in the future is around funding. So we had looked at, can we pair a tournament? And we haven't been able to try this out yet, but because the pandemic interrupted our plans. But can we potentially pair a tournament with the Atlantic Championships or Prairies or Western? And maybe it's an alumni tournament or alumni and supporters tournament. And it's a fundraiser for whichever teams are going to try and go to university nationals, to try and alleviate some of that financial burden. And know you're paying a little more, but you're helping someone who maybe you have a job now and you remember when you didn't have as much money as a university student. Maybe you're living out of an RV at your friend's place. But in any case, that's one of those ideas that we were looking at is, are there other ways to help fund and help support that travel? Because that is usually the biggest barrier.
Speaking of a tournament that requires some travel, because this one also does. I'm not sure if this was a coach that sent this in, but they want to know when the team list for the tournament that you said didn't happen, and now this year is gonna happen. We're excited for it. Hoping to bring some more hype from it from a Huckin perspective. But for the high school championships, is there is that list coming out? Teams applying? Like, what's going on there?
Sure. So Leanne Leduc, who I mentioned earlier, she'll be the one in charge of the high school event this year. Troy had helped organize the start of it, but now Leanne is the lead person. I'm not 100% sure on where it is exactly, but I do know invitations went out to a number of schools. And I believe at this point, they're just trying to finalize kind of the last few teams before they're able to announce it.
Excellent. I think back in the day before I did any other media, I got to commentate games at this when it was in Surrey, BC, and it was very fun, and I was very bad at it. So hopefully
I want to hear it.
It's very bad. I basically had all the parents tweeting at me, and they were like telling me all these really horrible facts about their children, and I was just saying those during the game. Theo, you would have died. Okay.
I would have cringed, maybe.
For sure. I know that this next question has been something, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. We also had people from Ultimate, the competitions committee, I believe, come on and talk about it before as well. But do you personally rather have any comments about how to keep the top teams that generally fly south to play, how to keep them competing in Canada more consistently?
Yeah, it's always a tricky question, right? Because one of the best places for those teams to get better is to go to the US. And if we want to compete well internationally, we want our best teams to get good experience and to get better. But at the same time, if we don't support local events, we are not providing local opportunities to develop and opportunities to build the sport. So in trying to convince teams to do anything, you usually have a carrot or a stick as your two options. The stick doesn't often work very well, and usually has a little more pushback to it. So the carrot is often the direction that you look for. So what do these teams want? They want competition. They want opportunities to play on national teams. They want opportunities to get better, to feel that it was worth their time to go to this event. And so some of that comes from community. I think a lot of people like going to CUC to see friends from across the country, which is, a great part of the event. I think another one for us is, can we increase the competition level there? Can we have more strong teams across the country? I've been a proponent kind of tiered divisions for a long time. So with juniors in terms of tiering, for university having a Div 1. That may be an idea that works for the CUC series in the future. Maybe it doesn't, but that might be a way to create more games that are of a higher competition level for those top teams. Other things that I've explored, and who knows where we go with in the future, is, do we have CUC part of a bigger event? Can we include an international invitational at the end? Maybe the CUC winner portion is a straight 16-team bracket down to the winners, and the top 4 teams move on to play some international teams on day 3, and the rest play for placement. Are there things like that then it's a little more interesting of an event for people to want to go to? We can't have World Clubs qualifiers every year. I mean, that's another carrot that does come up. But we do have kind of WUGC as part of national teams in terms of requirements, and trying to build that as being, there are reasons to go. And some of the hope with that is with more teams there, the top teams attending, that it does attract the other ones to come as well, right? Because there used to be a lot of interest every 4 years for the WUGC qualifying year, because everyone wanted to see the top teams play and see how it went. But I think it's something that we have to be flexible about and consider different ideas. Not all of them are necessarily going to be something that's workable for everyone, but try and figure out what is something that is of interest, and it would work for different teams.
Danny's face lit up there. I think mine did as well. The whole international event, that sounds like, as the kids say, straight fire. Like the fact that they could have that opportunity to play some of these, like bring Clapham in, bring Revolution in. That'd be really cool. A cool opportunity. You mentioned Grandmasters as divisions that are taking place. This person wants to know, why isn't Ultimate Canada, this is their perspective, the question asker. Why isn't UC prioritizing women's ultimate at CUCs? And I think they're focusing specifically on Grandmasters division, but maybe even the fact that the women's division, we've talked about this before, has less teams. That's not really on you to make that happen, but they want to know your perspective, I think.
Sure. When I started working for Ultimate Canada, we did have an uneven number of teams or bids initially. Women's was smaller than Open. And one of the things we have done is, change that number so that there are the same number of bids. But if it doesn't fill, as you said, it is difficult for us to be able to do that. This year is a little tricky with World Clubs. And I also can see, the pandemic having a different effect on women's division teams than necessarily the open division teams. And you can see that, roles in families and, and different things coming up that can make it more challenging for women's division players to compete. So I think for us, Ultimate Canada has tried to create equal opportunities with live stream schedules. We try and make sure that women's has the same number of games or more than open. And we also have been, looking in terms of women's ultimate in terms of promotion, like final schedules, it's rotated between. We do have that, foremost in our thought process of trying not to have one division over the others and to be able to provide equitable opportunities there. In terms of Grandmasters, that's a whole other can of worms in that direction. I think Grandmasters is tricky for Ultimate Canada just based on our demographics. So we did release a survey that went to teams that played in Grandmasters divisions for World Clubs or showed interest in it. And it will be becoming public shortly, looking at the feasibility of a Grandmasters division, a Grandmasters event, and if we can run something around that. Now, some people would like to see as part of the Masters event, but we did have some challenges with that. One is around cannibalizing existing Masters teams. So the division isn't huge in terms of a number of the divisions, aside from maybe mixed. And if they lose in a lot of players, is that going to impact the viability of some of these divisions? And I think the second thing for us around it is the size of the event. As you get larger, the number of venues you can access across the country shrinks. So if people want to have events move around and go to different places, which is what we're hoping to continue doing with Masters, and maybe go to some more destination locations. Kelowna is a wine country. It's a nice area of BC to come visit. That size of event, if it gets too large, you're suddenly now only looking at 4 sites, maybe 5 in Canada that you can go to. So if people want to keep going to Brampton, that might work. But I think, some of the Masters and Grandmasters, maybe they want to go to different areas as well as part of that. So we are looking into Grandmasters, and especially can we do potentially a standalone event to provide more opportunities? Because I know for that age group, there aren't necessarily a ton of opportunities to play against people who are in the same age group or older.
Yeah, I feel like... Wait, what is the age for Grandmasters again,
It's
for women?
40 for open, and I believe it's 37 for the women's.
I'm so close. That is so scary.
Are you?
Well, a couple of years, yeah. Anyways.
Grandmasters, Danny Proby, let's go.
Just no one needs to say that out loud. Okay. This next question I think is interesting. First of all, because it's a stat that I wasn't sure about and we wanted to kind of fact check it. But it's just related to membership numbers and financing. So the question is, Ultimate Canada has a membership of 30,000. USA Ultimate has a membership of 36,000. Where does the money go?
All right. So technically, this may come as a shock to people. Ultimate Canada has 12 members. So 10 provinces and 2 territorial organizations are technically our members. We do have registered competitive athletes, which is what a lot of people might think of as memberships, that compete in our events. And then we have grassroots memberships that our PTSOs pay. Now, pre-pandemic, Ultimate Canada had over 40,000 grassroots members. They only send $3 up a person. And then we had maybe between 4,000 and 5,000 registered competitive athletes, most of whom would pay around $37. So it's more like 4,000 or 5,000 if you're comparing to the USAU number in terms of what Ultimate Canada has for that figure. And the US figure for what they charge is $66 US dollars, which is about 88 Canadian. So we take in probably less than half of what they do per player. So USAU is able to offer more services. They do have a longer season. Their weather cooperates a little better than ours does. But part of UC's challenge is kind of finding that price point that works, and that people already complain around where the pricing is, but want us to offer services the same as USAU does. But it's not really possible to have it both ways in terms of the amount of money coming in and what you're able to offer at the same time. So a lot of sports in Canada have government funding. So we don't have that Sport Canada funding, but that helps them with a lot of being able to invest in different areas. To answer the second part of the question, where does the money go? So the money goes into a few different areas for us. One is, like most organizations, you have to invest in administrative costs. You have to invest in terms of human resources, in terms of committees. We invest money into national teams. We invest money into coaching programs, grant programs to support the community. We subsidize an annual conference, the Ultimate Canada Conference, to bring the community together. And we also work with provincial and territorial sport organizations to determine what some of their priorities are so that we can invest in those. And we commit up to $15,000 a year up to those projects. So maybe on developing a new coaching module in terms of developing a game facilitator program that was used particularly in Quebec to help them with school ultimate. So those are some of the areas that we, spend the fees in, but there's also a ton of different administrative ones that are quite boring, like insurance and things of that nature.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think transparency is something that people really want. And I just think that it does help, because I don't think there's a general understanding amongst the community that just to exist and to put on a couple events a year, there's so many people involved and salaries and you have to pay all these other fees. So I think the question for me was very interesting because, first of all, those numbers just didn't make sense in my head. So hearing you kind of explain a little bit more that it's actually more like 5,000 members, that math checks out. I was like, there is no way we have 30,000 people competing in Ultimate Canada events, like regionals and nationals and stuff. So thank you for saying that.
You did bring up the tournament fees, and that's something I think both Danny and I have talked about, people wanting the moon, but then want to pay very little for it. So money has to come from somewhere. And there's another question related to finances. This one more specific to nationals, and wondering if nationals from this past year, if that information is going to be public of where the funds went.
We don't generally publish the finances for every event we run. We do provide our audited financial statements to our PTSOs as part of our AGM, and they do review items like that. We have an FAQ actually on our website. It's a little dated now, but it would show you roughly where the CUC funds go, and in terms of how it's divided up. I think I could give you a ballpark for this year for Brampton. Because we didn't end up with some of the worst case scenarios we had there, we probably ended up with about a $10,000 surplus over about 2,000 athletes. So about $5 a player in terms of what the surplus would go to support general things beyond that. With that being said, again, we haven't had things fully audited, so this is just kind of ballparking. With that being said, we got about $50,000 in grants. And so that's a lot of why we host in Brampton, and we were able to get an Ontario grant as well. to help subsidize the costs around that for players. For the fees for Ultimate Canada for like CUC, we did reduce the fees a number of years ago and remove, I think it was like the Saturday dinner. I don't know how many years ago that was. But the fees we've tried to kind of keep them reasonable, and some of it is us going out and some of those RCA fees, or the Registered Competitive Athlete fees, helping to fund staff trying to find grants like that to help with events. So we have been able to do some of that to help out with the events, and I think for us with CUC, we end up looking at with diff events and how much they cost, and even if they're twice as long or 2.5, we're well below kind of that number, but we still do have to fly people in across our very large country, a lot of observers, and fly. Look at it in terms of commentators, look in terms of key volunteers to help run different parts. And so it does get a little tricky around those different costs there for us. And there are different services and expectations, I think, than a local tournament that's run by volunteers. And I think your point's a good one, Theo, talking about, people want the moon. And I think for a while the community had so many spectacular volunteers who went over and above on tournaments. And when some of those volunteers retire, it's really hard to step into those shoes. It's not necessarily sustainable for someone else to do that much work for some of those events.
All right. Totally changing gears again. We're all over the place. We're keeping everybody on their toes because this is going to be a nice long episode. So they're right there with us right now. So this person would like to know when they will change, Ultimate Canada will change the CUC format to the current juniors CUC format. So university to way juniors is.
Cool. I don't think we've considered that. So that would be another good question for the competition director, Andrew Batchelor, to get feedback on. But the juniors format, basically the top 16 has a chance to move up. It probably comes down to the field availability again, being a challenge there. But that may be something, and we've talked about it a few times around the Friday qualifier. Maybe the Friday qualifier becomes a little more like the juniors format in that we have a set number of teams that qualify for it. And you have to earn your spot through, your regional event to get that last chance to cross over. So it is something that, we're always open to ideas and change, and we can definitely consider that. But there's no specific plans around the juniors format moving over to university nationals.
Also a different time of season. So, it's a summer and it could be held in different days of the calendar, whereas they're also students, university students out here. So there's a certain constraints as well. This is our final question for the evening. Probably competition related again, but we're going to ask it. Will Ultimate Canada adopt a ranking system using an algorithm? I do love the USAU algorithm. I think it's cool for the club season. So is that something that maybe that could be, you talked about one of the cares, maybe the rankings. I don't know if that would get some people excited, but that would be kind of cool as well. So can you speak to that? Has that ever been thought about? Or maybe you're going to say now it's a good idea and you'll take it back to the competition committee?
Yeah, I don't know if there is enough interplay east-west to be able to get reliable data for an algorithm in terms of the silos or regions that people play before a really short summer season. The USAU algorithm, I think, works in large part because there's a lot of games and a lot of data. I don't know what the number is now, but I think at one point you had to play a minimum of 10 ranked games that were in there. And I think it would be difficult for us to have enough crossover to have something reliable on that. But it is definitely something that could be reviewed by the competitions committee, but that's my gut reaction. I know Batch and I, or Andrew Batchelor, kind of looked at a draw system to try and help deal with some of that. So you can see that with some of the CUC rankings and university national rankings, that often we do a bit of a randomized draw between some seeds that we're not sure, or a range of seeds. That's similar to what tennis tournaments do. So, you always have 1 and 2 on opposite ends, but then you have other seeds going in. And if you look at, say, FIFA and the World Cup, they do a similar thing of kind of drawing where teams from certain regions or kind of rankings end up going. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to win, you got to win. You got to win your games to move through, and it does help deal with some of the unknowns of seeding by making it a little bit of a draw there in terms of where you end up.
Now,
Swiss draw. That's
Theo's a big fan of Swiss draw.
Let's do Swiss draw, Danny.
There were a couple questions that came in about the U of T situation, and we're not going to discuss that on this podcast. So hopefully when we get Andrew Batchelor on, he can talk a little bit more about it, because it's either still kind of in discussion or outside of your current role knowledge base. Is that correct, Danny?
So I'm not currently on the competitions committee full time, which is the body that oversees the university. So I wasn't at their meetings kind of discussing the issue. So I think before speaking to that issue, I'd want to be checking in with that committee.
Perfect. So stay tuned for that one when we have somebody from the competitions committee come on the podcast, and we will talk about it. We will give you what you want, Huckin audience.
Yeah, there was more than one message about it, so we know it was a hot topic amongst the crowd there. And Batch, you're a big listener of the pod, so you don't even know that you've been invited on again. So consider this your invite. We're not even going to send it to you. We're going to send it to you after you listen to it. So that's how he'll know. But Danny, appreciate your time. You got a busy schedule out there, so we do are thankful for that. And this has been a long one, girthy, as one host would like to say. So, any final thoughts before we sign off and let you go there?
Oh, I just want to thank the two of you for all the work you're doing in promoting the Canadian Ultimate scene. It's great to see people take initiative in our community and be champions promoting different aspects of the sport. And glad both of you took this project on to help promote the sport across the country.
Thanks.
We do appreciate that. Danny, thank you for coming in. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. It was a great discussion. We got to have you on again, because I know there's going to be definitely people with some more questions. So, Huckin audience, if you got more questions, store them in your mind. You may see a story prompt at some point, and you might have another chance to ask some questions. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back.
Hey, this is Leanne Campbell from the McGill Ultimate Team, your 2022 Huckin A Div 1 College Women's Player of the Year. And you're listening to the Huckin A Podcast, your coast-to-coast guide for all things Canadian Ultimate.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this episode. I wasn't expecting to learn as much as I did. I feel like I have a good pulse of what's going on in the Canadian Ultimate scene, especially since starting this podcast with you. Were there any... Sorry, I'm not gonna lead you. What were your takeaways?
There was a lot of name dropping in this segment as well that I really enjoyed. And so that was one thing I took out of it. But some of the other things too is the whole restructuring of how the organization is. So the fact that there's going to be someone focusing more on senior, but not just senior and masters, but not just the CUCs, but also the national teams, and someone focusing on the junior national teams and the junior events. That was interesting. And so that gave us a lot of information, and just even the role that he has evolved. And that's always interesting to learn about. And COVID always plays a role in that, has played a role in that. So learning how that all works together, and we highlighted the position in the news, how you should apply. They're trying to get to that full staffing, and we really wish them the best of luck in that, because the events are only going to get better from here, and all those things communications wise once they hire the full amount of staff back. Because imagine one person like he was doing, running basically 4 other positions. It's not going to work out, So what about you, Danny? Any things? Your face lit up a couple times during the interview. I know that for sure. So anything stand out to you?
Yeah, the Canada Cup stuff. I love the idea of bringing some international events into Canada. It's really exciting to me. I know he mentioned the U17 thing. I'm pretty passionate about that getting off the ground. I am a bit concerned that if we don't get more international experience for our junior athletes, that it's going to hurt us, because all these European teams are getting to play other European teams consistently. And we only really have the States. So even if we play a U17 squad against the States, something like that, I think that would be really good. I know that they're looking more locally first. So that was interesting. Yeah, I think for me, I've just known him for so long, and kind of getting him to talk a little bit more about his life experiences and his role within Ultimate Canada was exciting for me, because I kind of know him as this goofy dad who was on my mixed team that we went to nationals with a couple times. And so hearing him kind of speak about Ultimate Canada in this way was just really enlightening for me about him as a person. I've always known that he has this wealth of knowledge, but to hear his whole resume was pretty incredible. So he's a cool dude, and I feel very lucky to know him.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you dropped a lot of facts that maybe you didn't know, but I know a lot of the audience wouldn't have known. Like a law degree, MBA as well. Like that's some pretty cool experience that he brings into the role there. So we hinted at it in the main event. We're hoping to have another member come on. So once again, the invite's being extended to you via the podcast. It's not going to be extended to you via text. You're going to come on the podcast there, and we're going to hopefully have Batch on, and then you can really, Huckin the audience, have your chance to ask some competition-related questions and really curate those towards him. So that may be coming in the future, so stay tuned for that. Once again, hit us up on socials, and you know how it is. So also, like and subscribe to the video. I know that's a YouTube thing, but if you subscribe to Ultra and like it, then you can get notifications for when these episodes drop. So I know I sound like a YouTuber there, but maybe one day we'll venture into that area.
We have a subscriber section today that's a little bit different than normal. It's going to be Coach's Corner with me again, but this time I'm going to be talking about my favorite sports books. So if you're a reader and you want some good recommendations about sports, psychology, learning, any of those kinds of things that have really helped me in my career of coaching and of playing too, I'm going to be heading over there. Theo, have you ever read any sports-related novels, books, biographies?
I mean, come on, I read those every day, but no, I'm more in the sports podcast realm now than I am the sports books. But I have read a few different books there. One specifically that I enjoyed is called The Cubs Way, which is about the Chicago Cubs. Nothing to do with coaching, but managing and creating a team. It was good. So that's one of my favorite ones. But yeah, I'm more into the podcasts. So that's more of my thing. There's a lot of good leadership podcasts out there as well that the audience can check out. But I'm more like in the sports news realm, if anything. So
yeah, that's fair. I also wanted to say, Batch, if you are listening to this, we also will only... Oh, yeah, true. But I don't know if he listens to this part. He wants to fact check us on our outros potentially. But you can only accept your invitation via commenting on YouTube and subscribing. You've probably already subscribed. Let's get real. But you can only accept your invitation by commenting on our YouTube that you accept. So there you go.
There are people dropping comments more and more. We do appreciate that. Brandon Adibay is one of them. He comments on almost not every episode, but a lot of them. So appreciate that. And someone asked Kelsey specifically, maybe this was Ricky McLeod, but I couldn't really tell. But it was Ricky MC, I think, was the username. So probably Ricky McLeod out there. But asking Kelsey specifically, what brands did you talk to? What businesses? So it's kind of cool to see then Kelsey answering. So go in the comments. Maybe someone will answer you. So,
speaking of Kelsey, thank you, Kelsey, for covering for me last week. And speaking of next week, you got to stay tuned to find out what it's going to be. You got to follow the socials. We never know. I'm just joking. We always know. We're super planned years in advance. But if you do have any ideas of things that you want us to cover, people you want us to highlight, games you want us to kind of do a throwback to, DMs are always open. You can email us at hucking@ultiworld.com. All that good stuff. Nailed it. I'll get it 1 year. I'll be really confident and I won't have to look for validation. But anyways, thank you for being here for this girthy episode. We will see you next week.